thank you very much for a small but perfectly formed audience in terms of turning out for this. So yes, this is part of, I suppose, an extended farewell tour of me leaving Campaign for Better Transport, formerly Transport 2000, after 30 years. And what I thought I'd do would be just say a little bit about what I think some of the campaigning that's happened over the last 30 years has told us about roads and the environment. So this is me. I've done various things over time. My introduction to this entire thing actually was when I was living in North London. I was being brought up in North London, and the Ministry of Transport, as it then was, tried to widen the Archway Road, the A1, several times with, I think, 4 public inquiries, assessment studies and heaven knows what, and it remains, well, north of the Archway Bridge, defiantly unwidened. I think, and that was, I'll come back to that because it seems to me that there's some interesting lessons from that in terms of the waves of protests against roads. I also did some work in Victoria, Australia, supporting an anti-freeway campaign at the Conservation Council for Victoria. And then for the last 30 years, I've been Chief Executive of Transport 2000, the Campaign for Better Transport, and I'm now a Transport Policy Consultant and also a trustee of something called the Foundation for Integrated Transport, which gives funding to support groups and projects to do with transport. I'll come back to that too in a minute. Why are people worried about roads and the environment? Well, I think there are 5 main areas. Firstly, landscape. The impacts of roads on valued landscapes and places. That's a picture of Twyford Down, site of an iconic battle in the 1990s over the driving of a major road through a site of special scientific interest, an area of outstanding natural beauty. And I think the point is not that these are valued by conservationists, but they're valued by people in the area as well, and that makes it very important. So it's valued places, not just valued landscapes in a designated sense. Similarly, biodiversity impacts on important wildlife sites. We're seeing that at the moment too. And then there's increased traffic, the noise, intrusion and pollution from the increased traffic that new and larger roads bring. And then there is also associated development, especially new housing. I mentioned the Foundation for Integrated Transport. That foundation funded a report which came out the other week talking about new housing developments, creating congestion because of building roads without pavements, houses without pavements, any public transport at all, and local facilities. So you get road-based development, especially new housing, alongside big new roads. And then finally, at a larger scale level, there is climate change, where new roads and extra traffic add to carbon emissions, which in the context of the government having signed up to keeping the Paris Agreement of keeping emissions within 1.5 degrees, a temperature rise within 1.5 degrees, it is perhaps a bigger issue than is being made at the moment. So are we nearly there yet? What progress has there been? And here I'm indebted to Steve Gooding, who has now the RAC Foundation, who's made the distinction between building things right and building the right things. And I think, so what I'm going to talk about is, have we made progress on both of those areas? And I think on building things right, there has been some progress. There's more acceptance of tunnelling. So after the M3, we've now seen the A3. That's the picture at the bottom right-hand corner is the tunnel at Hindhead, which has essentially taken the traffic away from, has provided the relief of the local community with a tunnel that makes it, sorry about this, and and that's regarded as a piece of good practice, I think, across the piece. There's also been moves towards green bridges, and the other picture there is of a bridge on the A21, and we've seen other proposals coming with the designated funds for environment, including green retrofits, producing, for example, a scheme on the A38 near Plymouth for a high-quality green bridge. And broadly speaking, there's better landscaping and road management that we're seeing. There are designated, as I said, there are designated funds for environment, and it seems likely from RIS2 that these are going to continue into the future. I'd say, however, there's still a problem that scheme design tends to be still ruled by benefit-cost ratios rather than making good places. Hindhead perhaps is an exception in that, in which landscape and biodiversity are traded off against small time savings. And I think that's certainly an issue on, for example, the Liverpool Port Access Road, which goes through a country park, which is much valued by local people, and the benefit-cost ratio says that if you try to tunnel it or sink it so as to protect the country park, that would tip the BCR into a negative, or at least below the guideline 1.7, and that's unsurprisingly faced resistance locally. So I think there has been progress to building things right, but there's a lot more to do, and I think an approach that is more about placemaking and less about benefit-cost ratios would bring some benefits. I also think however, there are some bigger questions about building the right things. And we're seeing from the budget last week huge spending on the strategic road network in RIS2, lots of people here talking about that, and on the a lesser extent on the major road network. There is, however, limited spending on everything else. Funding for local transport outside a few cities is limited to non-existent, and you may have heard on the radio this morning Andy Burnham talking in a bipartisan way with Andy Street, the mayor for the West Midlands, about the need to rebalance that, and calling in the National Infrastructure Commission as evidence on this. So that there is an issue not just about the spending on roads, on big roads, but about the balance between that spending and spending on everything else in relation to local transport. And some of you may have heard Matthew Lugg talk about the case for spending on local roads and local transport in his role at the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transport. I mentioned car dependence. That picture at the bottom there is from the Transport for New Homes report, which has shown the building of new roads with new housing, with no local facilities, and the car dependence that brings. And the risk is that big investment in strategic road network and housing related to it will just speed up journeys between ever worsening traffic jams, so that actually, even to the extent of actually helping motorists, it's not doing the right thing. And there is also, I think, an over-reliance on technology, electric and autonomous vehicles, to solve all these problems. And even electric and autonomous vehicles can get caught in traffic jams. And I think there are some issues. That map there is, that plan is of part of the Lower Thames crossing. And I think it's fair to say that's one of the largest pieces of road infrastructure being planned at the moment in this country. And you'll see from there, that's a map produced by the local Wildlife Trust, and it shows how it will fragment and affect local woodland and so on. Now, there are other battles on the way. Arundel bypass is faced with 2 judicial reviews and a lot of concern about the impact on ancient woodland and the national park. And I think the Oxford-Cambridge Expressway, much talk here about that, also faces significant local resistance and some question marks even from local authorities and the subnational transport body about whether the expressway is the right thing to do. Now, you could say this is Highways UK, and here am I raining on the parade here. Lots of people here building roads. There's a strong. There's an argument which goes. There's a strong government pro-road support for big new road building from the politicians. People like driving cars, etc. Why should we take any notice of this? And I think the answer to that is this goes in cycles. Back to the Archway Road. The Archway Road and other protests like it in the 1970s over the M3, several other roads that and public inquiries that into roads, were the focus of a lot of local protest. Similarly, in 1989, we had the Roads of Prosperity, the biggest road programme since the Romans. It was heralded. By 1998, we had a roads review that was detrunking 40% of the trunk road network and taking huge chunks out of the roads programme because of widespread local concern and opposition to what was being built. And we're seeing that now, as I've said, large, strong local opposition on the south coast, Oxford, Liverpool, Stonehenge has international concern about the scale, about whether the tunnel there is long enough, and so on. And I think also a broader point, that broader point about building big new roads on the strategic road network only to tip them onto congested local roads, so that overall motorists' journeys get longer, even if they're being spent, they're speeding from traffic jam to traffic jam, is going to raise its head, particularly given the nature of local authority spending now. And anyway, all the surveys suggest that the priority for motorists is local road maintenance rather than big new strategic roads. So even at a motorist opinion level, this isn't where the average motorist is, particularly if local congestion goes up. So what do I think is the way out of this? Well, I think it's in several directions. Firstly, I think we need better planning. Scenarios, not forecasts. We do have scenarios, but there's a tendency in practice to go to the central case and not worry about the outliers, which, among other things, including outliers that assume that current trends of young people driving and owning cars less continue into the future, which you could argue ought to be business as usual rather than an outlier, but that's the way it's treated. So we need scenarios, not forecasts, and we need multimodal rather than roads-based planning, particularly on things like Oxford-Cambridge. And we need real data, to use the increasing use of real data that's available rather than relying on models and past trends continue forecasting. Secondly, I think we need better spending. We need packages, not schemes, to support alternatives to single occupancy car travel. When I was at the Campaign for Better Transport as part of our RIS2 evidence, we had a piece of work done by the University of Northampton which showed that on the A45 it would be possible, using the origin and destination data they had for major travel generators around Northamptonshire, to reduce existing car traffic on that road by 20% simply by doing car sharing and better bus services and better walking and cycling conditions for the large number of local journeys that were using that trunk road. That's just that shows that the idea of packages of measures can make a bigger difference even on trunk roads than simply building roads. I've mentioned this already, but I think we ought to be talking about placemaking rather than benefit-cost ratios. There's all sorts of reasons why you might do that. And in a funny sort of way, what we've got there is that agenda is very strongly there in the cities. All the cities now are doing placemaking programs of cycling and walking schemes, high-quality public transport, reduced traffic, more pedestrian areas. Outside the cities, we're busy building big new roads. So it feels slightly at odds with what's going on there. And I know Highways England's RIS programme talked about, well, maybe you can have ring roads and park and rides and so on, but that's not anywhere in the RIS programme. Then I think it's also about green retrofitting the roads that we have to make them more environmentally sensitive and better rather than just big new schemes. Integration, not just roads and cars, and technology as a servant rather than a master. And it's not like we don't have models for this. So those photos, from the top left is the Milton Keynes coachway, which is just off the M1 and allows coaches to interchange with local buses to get people into Milton Keynes. We could do lots more of that kind of thing. And I know that Highways England, with others, including the Campaign for Better Transport, is looking at work on how you integrate buses and coaches on the trunk road network, and so Milton Keynes might be a model. That roundabout there is actually a cycle roundabout from the Netherlands. They're building cycle roundabouts on top of their trunk roads. And the bottom picture is from Hamburg, where they've covered over their motorway and built parks and houses on it. And there are opportunities, and when I said green retrofit, that was the sort of thing I was thinking of. And I know it's something that TfL have been looking at in the case of the A13 and the Hammersmith flyover in London. So there are, I'd argue, we're not there yet. We've got better at at building things right. We're not necessarily building the right things at the moment, and we need a better balance, which gives priority to the environment, and crucially, and I mentioned this at the start, treats transport, has a transport and roads policy as if climate change was real, serious and mattered, and it really does. Thank you very much. I mean, I don't know if you want to take questions or anything else. If there are people have comments or questions, I'll be very happy to take them. Otherwise, I'm sure there are other things here. Yes. So, that's a. Well, I think it's fair to say that the 25-year plan, does talk about net environmental gains, and that doesn't seem to have made its way into roads policy yet. I think, in particular, that there's a kind of legal angle to that, which comes up, for example, on Arundel. The National Network's National Policy Statement says that road building should only happen in exceptional circumstances in designated areas of all sorts, national parks, areas of outstanding natural beauty, sites of special scientific interest, and so on. I think there's a risk that exceptional circumstances overriding those comes to mean lots of small time savings in a benefit-cost ratio rather than major economic benefits over and above any of that. So I think there is an issue about how the RIS2 programme will be squared with, on things like the Oxford-Cambridge Expressway, will be squared against the 25-year plan. And I think these are live issues in government at the moment. Thank you very much.